have a special treat for you now, the panel that I've been most excited about since we started preparations for the Conclave. Has anyone here heard of X.AI? Yeah, not my team. Anyone else? Okay, I see a couple of hands. So basically, it's an AI-powered secretary service. You just need to connect your calendar, and the software will schedule all your meetings for you. So I waited 2 years to get my free X.AI secretary by signing on a wait list. And finally, when I did get it, I went off the workforce for a small break last year. And then until this panel, I didn't really have a big meeting that I needed to coordinate with 6, 7 people. So I thought I'll try Amy Ingram, who's my X.AI secretary. And I won't get into the details. I'll tell you later if you catch me. But when I used Amy, it did not go well. Amy didn't understand what I wanted from her. Like, I wanted 2 calls, and poor Ajit ended up getting 10 emails from Amy. But the process was so seamless that Jay, who didn't realize it was Amy was actually an AI and not a real person. He told me, Amy's getting a little confused, I think. And he thought I had a secretary sitting in the US and that I was so rich or something that I could afford a set.
I actually messaged on WhatsApp saying, hey, this Amy looks very confused. She sent me 4 emails. And by the way, how can you afford a secretary in the US? And then she
so maybe Amy didn't win this particular job, but it's a good, I think, analogy for the session that we are entering. I'll quickly introduce our panelists. So Jay, who just spoke, Jaisimha Rao, is a CMU alum, founder of Tartan Sense, which uses drones, robotics, and AI in agriculture. Madhav Bhagat, a CMU alum, is co-founder of SpotDraft, which uses AI in a legal context. I'm sure he can tell you a lot of lawyer jokes later, potentially. Ajit Mahadevan, also a CMU alum, is partner at Bridgespan Group, and he specializes in poverty alleviation and skill development. Janani Sriram is engineering manager of machine learning at LinkedIn and leads initiatives around career relevance. And she's also worked at a CMU co-founded AI company, Mad Street then. Dr. Arjun Kalyanpur is founder of Telrad Solutions, and he uses AI in medical diagnosis. I'm sure you're sensing a theme here. Dr. Namit Chaturvedi is a computer scientist and has worked in academia and in finance. Our moderator, Priya Chetty Rajgopal, is a well-known CXO search consultant, and she's a phenomenal woman, a miracle worker, as some of us in the city know, because she's a local celebrity as well, and someone that I deeply admire. So over to Priya.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And first, this seems to be the penultimate session, so we better deliver before you get to tea and whoever is going to CMU goes. I wanted to quickly tell you that my incredible natural intelligence brought me to a very, very critical factor, which was that 3 of the panelists that we have here, all rock stars, by the way, I've had a chat with them, so I can confirm that. 3 of them are CMU alumni. So I really applied my brilliant mind to this, and what I discovered was that if you are a CMU alumni, you have a 50% chance to be on an absolutely fabulous panel. So can I just have a round of applause for both me and for Conclave? I thought I'd just sort of put that in context. So a little while ago, when we had this conference call that Amy set up, and I really feel extremely bad for the fact that Rashmi dissed her. She was fabulous. The first thing that she sort of didn't figure out was there were more than 4 people in any panel. But after that, we kind of got set, and we were really doing all right. We had so much fun on the conference call that Amy would have been very upset because the call went from 30 minutes to about 1.5 hours, or maybe more. I think that was about it. So if we have half the fun that we had on that call, we're doing all right today. Fantastic group of panelists. Absolutely different spaces, different orientations, different ideas of what artificial intelligence will mean for the future of jobs. And I'm completely unqualified on the artificial intelligence part of it. You have seen my natural intelligence at play, so that's something that I am sure you're completely impressed about. But the jobs part of it is really my space because I'm a search consultant, and I've just set up a company of my own called Multiversal Advisory. And therefore, that's something that I'm very excited about because we are going to have to be ready for the jobs of the future. The future is tunneling into us, so we really don't have a choice of saying, how are we going to cope with this and what's going to happen. But we kind of owe it to ourselves with panels like this to be able to talk about what we need to be ready for. So when I was growing up, I know this terrible tried and tested conversation of the Jetsons and the fact that there was there was this magical thing where the Father Jetson would just call somebody and the face would pop up on a phone, then he would get onto the scooter and go away somewhere. And I was laughing and I said, can you imagine? Then about 5 years ago when I was FaceTiming my sister-in-law and I said, I'm a Jetson. Oh my God, I'm a Jetson. So you know what? The future comes and sort of attacks you much sooner than you really think it will, and it does. So be prepared. So this conversation is about not just the future of jobs, but a whole lot of other interesting things that will hopefully make us ready. Am I okay? Am I too soft? Can you hear me okay from the back? Yeah, okay. If you need me to speak up, okay. So the conversations are a lot also about policy. The conversations are about ethics and about creating and sort of capacity. So there are a lot of things I think that will come up in this discussion which will enable us to understand what the perspectives are on the future of jobs and artificial intelligence. So what I would like to do, if it's okay with you in terms of the flow, is to be able to quickly start a question each to our panelists. And perhaps at the last 15, 20 minutes, if you have a couple of questions that you would like to ask, we can do that and close. Does that flow seem okay? Is that what you've been used to? Is it okay? Yeah, all right. So I was quite excited about the fact that the first robot in the world got a nationality, and Sophie is now a Saudi national. She was born on the same day as me, October 11th. So, and Amitabh Bachchan, if you are particular. You have Sophie, doing what she's doing in Saudi Arabia. And Jessica, let me talk to you. You've got this terribly interesting company called Tartan Sense, which I just understood why Tartan.
Yeah.
But so, take a round of applause, Carnegie Mellon. You have very devout alumni, I can say that.
I don't know whether the VCs are here, but it is a very strategic naming device. Why Tartan Sense? And I say, hey, guess what? I'm from Carnegie Mellon. I'm very smart. So give me money.
Guys, just sort of make a note
Still
of that.
working on raising some money.
But Jesma, when we were talking, we had a whole gamut of conversations around, the fact that it's happening anyway. The fact that we're not talking just about, the jobs that are lost or jobs that are gained, but also a very interesting point that you made that there are some jobs that do not have to be done by humans at all. And I remember many, many different layers coming out from that conversation that were absolutely riveting, given particularly that the space that you're in, which is agriculture, is not something that you normally would associate with artificial intelligence. So can we talk a little bit about complementarity? We talked about the fact that you don't have to have one without the other, and that actually is about artificial intelligence, that it's not an either or, it's a continuum. It's something where you have a wide-ish space that you can work across. There's no right and wrong, there's no, I like the word cautiously optimistic that many of us used in that conversation, that's what it kind of leaves you with. But hopefully we can move on to something else. Your rover, the fact that you do such specific work, tell us a little bit about the complementarity of it, and also about agriculture and your learnings where it's important to create alternatives before you take away jobs.
Yeah, thanks. How I like to think about it is a lot of the work that's currently done on the ag field, humans don't want to do it. And if you speak to the people there, they think mechanization or robotic solution is a better solution. And I think that's what we need to really attack there. And this idea that it's artificial intelligence, I think it's a bit of a misnomer. I like to think of it as a augmented intelligence.
I like that word, by the way.
Thank you.
I think we battled that for some time, and I think that really works well. Artificial just sounds a little...
Artificial.
Yeah, it sounds a little. It sounds a little scary.
Yeah, it sounds also ominous. If you Google artificial intelligence, the first image that comes up is these eyes and these binary figures and some strange stuff, and it scares the heck out of you.
Yeah.
So yeah, augmented intelligence, let's go with that.
So let me speak about specifically, just to educate the audience on what, one very specific use case. India spends about $15 billion on weedicide. So what is a weedicide? A weedicide is a chemical that is used to kill a weed on a farm. And this chemical is specifically used to kill only weeds. But the way these weeds are actually applied on the farm is they are blanket applied on the entire farm. And there's really no need to blanket apply a chemical that's specifically meant to kill one species. So what our robot does, and we're currently live in India, is we have a robot traversing the farmland, real-time detecting, are you a weed or are you a crop? And specifically spraying the weedicide on that weed. And it's happening in India now. We're currently in pilot phase. So when people come and ask me, hey, are you going to take the job out of the guy who's doing the weedicide? I flip to him and say, hey, have you been on a farm? Have you seen the guy? Have you interviewed the person who's actually removing weeds from the ground, working on 47 degrees in Maharashtra? He doesn't want to be doing the job. So the real question is, are humans doing jobs that machines should be doing, as opposed to this fear factor that machines are coming to take away jobs? And that's the way I look at it. This is a real-life example of what's happening in the agriculture field. Where the AI in this is, for people who don't know, is the AI is getting so good at detecting a weed from a crop. So that's where the AI element is. And beyond that, it's just traditional, mechanization. And that's the way I try to sort of keep people, all these doomsday sayers are saying, hey, AI is coming to take your jobs. Number one, is a machine better at a job? And number two, can it make humans safer, better? Another classic example is this idea of self-driving, right? Self-driving cars will come and take away jobs that millions of drivers are currently doing. But the other scary stat is 1.2 million, and again, this is a million, people die on the roads every day. That's 1 million people die. So I'm okay, and this might be a little provocative, if 250,000 driver jobs are out of the picture. To save that 1 million, I'm okay to make that trade. And that's the trade that we need to think about.
I'm going to give you an out on that. You actually didn't say 1.2 million jobs are going to go. You're going to say that you were saying they're all going to become entrepreneurs.
Yes,
Yep.
why not?
I remember that conversation. So you are actually creating an entrepreneurial kind of a platform, sometimes by AI. And if I can just add, I worry about most of those accidents happening in Bangalore, considering how long it took for me to come from my home to here. But great points on from an agriculture perspective. We just don't really think about it. So I mean, wasn't that a great perspective in terms of understanding where it fits at this end of the industry as well? So thank you for sharing that. Ajit, I'm going to come to you because I remember a conversation also around creating capacity and working on social impact. We also talked about your business life before you got into something equally business-like, but much more impactful on the Human Development Index, if I can put it that way. So creating capacity at the bottom of the pyramid is something that you're excited about. Tell us about AI jobs and how this ties in with what you do.
So, I think it's this I was sort of, whenever we were talking about this topic, I was taking a step back and thinking that, and I was, I think since the 1800s, there's been this rhetoric saying the machines are coming, right? It was a very Luddite kind of view. And I think if some of us like me who actually remember the 1980s, I don't know how many of you are that old, don't look so many, but I actually remember.
I just talked about the Jetsons.
But I actually remember every time there used to be even a small machine in an Indian factory, the big names, whole factories would get shut down, and there would be, Maruti went through series of when they had. So I think that this idea of, I'm just trying to sort of split the whole concept of mechanization, or you use the word, some of it is AI and some of it is frankly just mechanization. I think, frankly, mechanization or technology, if you want to use a broad phrase, has been significantly net positive for jobs. Even today, 5% of the jobs in the world are actually genuinely automated. The rest of it is all human beings. So that's the first, just to take a base reality, what we're talking about really is the point I think which Jai mentioned, which is that are human beings actually doing the work they should be doing?
Good point.
And, is this actually, and, I just want to sort of leave two thoughts on this one. One is that, again, sort of, I have this macro view, so please excuse my going back to 1800s and stuff like that. But I think that when machines came in the 1800s, it's actually one of the big reasons why monarchies of the world broke. Because till then, they used to fundamentally be the people who controlled all the money, and that drove everything. And that, of course, moved from the kings and queens of the world to the Andrew Carnegies and the Bill Gates and Ambani and all that. And so we've had, and I don't know if that's better or worse. I'm just saying it is what it is. But certainly mechanization did that. To me, the big difference between all the automation jobs that we had then and what we're talking about now is that perhaps for the first time we're saying, are there jobs which fundamentally was assumed to be a human strength around IQ, which is now going to be taken over by machines? And I think that's the big question. And I think my answer to that question is twofold. What I'm seeing on the ground as well is that there is an increased, on the one hand, yes, there is going to be that change, and I think we should accept that. So that 5% is not going to be 5% anymore. So I think we should accept that. The second question really is that I actually see a significant number of jobs being created already as we speak around what I would call, for lack of a better word, EQ jobs, around care, around creativity, around things like that. And I actually think I'm sort of picking a book around from what Jai said, but if you think about human beings becoming entrepreneurs, becoming, you're actually, my belief and my hope is that this next wave of technology, of which I think AI is one of them. Honestly, I don't want to sort of make that as only one. I think the big difference I see in that, or the flip I see, is that you will find more and more, you will democratize a lot of capital towards people at the bottom of the pyramid. I think people at the bottom of the pyramid will get more access to capital and will be able to control. So I see it as a more than a net positive, because I'm not so convinced that the 150 years of the past has been so great for the bottom of the pyramid. I mean, they've continued to be at the bottom, that's why they're called that. So I actually see this as a net positive. And I am seeing it in terms of even, I've done a lot of work in skilling, for example, and you actually see that, what you're finding that traditional jobs like construction, you would have liked to have believed that because we have more buildings like this and stuff, there is more construction happening, and that's true. But skilling has not resulted necessarily in incomes going up. It's at best resulted in more people who are better qualified getting the same jobs.
Got it. Yeah.
So I actually see that, again, we're coming down to a fundamental question of dignity of around this area, but I see that as I look at people being skilled more in healthcare, in diagnostics, in areas where there is huge gaps, this is where I see the jobs of future, and I'm frankly excited.
Wonderful. And I think we also discussed at some point the conversation around the people who were going to be getting these jobs being customers of artificial intelligence and getting better services on healthcare or financial services on that. And I like what you said about democratization of capital, because that is truly what the next, the next stage of growth is all about. You mentioned Bill Gates. I remember the interesting comment that I think happened where he said that, was it Rashmi, I think, who mentioned this? Since there are going to be that many less human workers who are going to be paying taxes, perhaps the robots should start paying taxes now. So moving away from robots and getting into something that I'm a search consultant, and I know how LinkedIn has changed, perhaps in some ways democratized talent, and LinkedIn has been an incredible force. Generally, when we talked, some of the conversations were so interesting around the ethical and the policy frameworks that are required. I was at an IBM conference about 1.5 months ago, 1 month ago, and I still remember this amazing woman who talked about, actually teaching, removing stereotypes and biases in the AI systems, and I was agog because I never even thought about that. But here is the largest repository of human talent in the world. So tell us a little bit. You're heading the engineering and the AI for LinkedIn, and I'm dazzled by perhaps what you could be doing. Tell us a little bit about the policy, the moral science of AI as far as LinkedIn is concerned?
Sure. My general perspective on this is basically that as AI practitioners, we have a big responsibility on our shoulders. We have the responsibility to do ethical AI as we were dabbling with names to call this, and ethical AI really sort of sums it up. This is a big responsibility. We need to figure out if we are talking about AI taking away jobs, then are they going to stand up to the scrutiny that we put human judgment under? So that is something to think about. And when we think about AI making a decision for us, what happens when someone is asked to explain this decision? What about bias? What about transparency? What about, can we understand this decision in some way? And explainable AI is something of great concern to researchers, and many of my esteemed colleagues and acquaintances are working on problems of this nature. So in general, I think when you're dealing with humans, careers are aspirational. It's about where they want to be, rather than simple job searches. And when we do that, we have to be careful not to take these statistical regularities that we see in data and then project them, because that's going to have its own set of biases. In general, the thinking for me is, how can we make ethical AI the foundation of everything we build? Because this is not something that can be solved in hindsight. It has to be very, very fundamental to our thinking. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I would be watching the space very closely, Janani. I know that, not just because I'm a search consultant, because I do believe there's so much that can happen, and perhaps, like he talked about, democratization of capital. The democratization of human capital is another whole, a whole new space waiting to happen. So I'm watching the space, and thank you for sharing that. And as far as numbers are concerned, I saw the Gartner and talking about AI being more of a continuum rather than being a binary, is it losing jobs, is it creating jobs, that kind of question. The Gartner survey showed by 2020 you're going to lose how many, 1.8 million jobs. And just when you're sort of blinking a little bit about that, it says, but you're also going to create, AI is also going to create 2.3 million jobs. So Namit, I want to come to you, because you've had this amazing background in really the hardcore of AI. You're a PhD, you've done so much of work in terms of creating products and engineering around this. Tell us a little bit about the fact that it's going to happen anyway. And perhaps, what is it that you look at which is skilling perhaps the future generations, and the interplay or the interdisciplinary nature of that? That's something that I loved what you said, bringing up that topic of interdisciplinary. I never thought about it.
Yeah. So where I came from during our discussion was that jobs and the effect of AI on jobs is just one aspect of how AI is going to affect the societies. Ajit talked about various macroeconomic effects as well. One of the other important areas where I believe we have to prepare ourselves is in law in particular, right? So when you're drafting policies that affect the nation, and when you use the assistance of intelligence, and artificial intelligence in a nutshell has its foundations on statistics and probability theory. Right? So when his robot identifies something as a weed, what it's saying is that I'm 90% confident that this is a weed, right? Not 100%. And this is enough for me to spray weedicide on it. Right? Now, accidental spray of weedicide on a crop is still okay. Right? But when you take judgments that affect people, so already in the US courts, the length of sentences are being affected by some statistical model predicting how likely this person is to recommit an offense after they're released.
Interesting, yeah.
Right? So, and where these models are, as Janani was talking about, the ethics become important because these models have been historically trained on the law enforcement data. right? And we know, as in every country, there is a lot of human biases already present in that data. Particular sections of the society are prone to being sentenced more harshly. And that's what now your machine is going to predict to you. So it's actually reinforcing your biases. Right? The other important aspect is, let's say, when you buy stuff on websites, right, e-commerce websites. Now, if people are selling it, if you have a marketplace where you have people present, you can very easily identify, or relatively easily identify instances of, let's say, cartelization. Right? There are trust busters who actually go after any such indications of cartelization. But when your e-commerce websites, you have 3 or 4 competitors, but these websites look at data from each other, and the algorithms within microseconds take decisions about which way to move prices. And it has happened in the past that there is evidence that these, if you apply game theory and maximization of profit for the company, these prices actually go up, right? So because both of us are doing the same thing, right? And this would be caught otherwise. But if an algorithm is doing that within microseconds, how would you establish liability in such cases?
Interesting.
Right? Okay. So its jobs is one thing, but this mechanization and this intelligence is going to be pervasive. And that's very important. You have to understand these things better. So in terms of what kind of skills we would need, it's not just that we all have to go to, so we have to move to, a high-skilled spectrum of employment. I think this has been a general trend over the last 30 years. I mean, jobs are moving towards high skill. It's the numerical literacy that we need to survive in the future, and especially to be able to take decisions about law, about policy. That becomes more and more important. Right? So you just have to recognize how, what is probability? I mean, how do you argue against things like, my algorithm is 99.9% accurate, and I think that this person is a terrorist. Right? How would you argue against an argument like this? And this happens. So I think mathematics has to be a major part which no stream will be untouched of. And here is where I believe humanities also have a big role to play, because we as engineers have a very specific way of thinking. Right? Questions about ethics don't naturally come to us. So when we say, hey, I need to train my model, I need lots of data, get me data. If you were making a college admissions AI, which recommends students for admissions using, let's say, 19th century data, you're not going to admit any women to your colleges. Right?
Yep.
So this might not be evident or very apparent to engineers themselves. And that's why I believe that there has to be a much stronger interplay between engineering and humanities going forward.
That's fantastic.
That's it.
And these are things that I think we don't realize how it plays out when you talk about artificial intelligence and real life and predicting the future. Undoubtedly, there is a large amount of reskilling, a large amount of interdisciplinary application that is required. And I think the kind of jobs that would come up from people who no longer have to do this one thing, but be many people. I'll give you an example. One of the largest IT clients that I ever dealt with, in India, only employs people who are like super engineers and super MBAs. But in other countries of the world, they actually have a 30% intake of liberal arts. That's mandated. And I think that's fantastic, but I think it's strange they don't do it here. But it's just interesting that is really how it goes. So thank you for that input as well, Namit. And if I may, I'd love to talk with Arjun. I mean, he's the one person I think who I've known the longest in the panel, and I've known his wife as well, who's an amazing woman. So Arjun runs Telerad and has been in this space for a very long time and creating really, really strong value. He has a very different point of view, and I'd really like to understand here, you're not talking about artificial intelligence taking away jobs, but truly in some ways creating a whole different kind of capacity or impact. So tell us a little bit about that in view of the fact that you are in the medical space.
So Priya, I think the fundamental issue in healthcare today is that there's a tremendous mismatch between supply and demand physicians. I think over the last few decades, the healthcare environment has evolved to a point where unfortunately we have not succeeded in tackling the communicable diseases which have been around since the beginning of time. So we still have TB killing 2 million patients every year. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that in this day and age that's allowed to happen, but it does.
And we still have leprosy. I was surprised that it's been supposed to be eradicated, but it still
It
exists.
still exists.
Yeah.
So,
There seems to be a problem.
oh, sorry.
Oh,
Is it not on? Can you hear me now?
a little louder perhaps.
Better?
Yes.
I'll just hold it, I think. So, so that's one issue. On the other side of the coin, we have the preventable diseases, so-called lifestyle diseases that are picking up. You know, cancer, heart disease, stroke. We call them the big three. And so we've got, you know, healthcare is at a very pivotal stage. And on the other side, we have a tremendous shortage of physicians. We have a shortage of all healthcare personnel, and physicians in particular. So India, it's been estimated as a shortage of 7 lakh doctors. I'm sure Dr. Chetty would have mentioned this number in his talk today or something like it. 20 lakh nurses. The numbers are ridiculous. And if you look at the profession I'm in, I'm a radiologist. We have 15,000 radiologists in India for a population of 1.3 billion. That's 11 radiologists for a million.
Oh, good Lord.
The United States has 100 radiologists for a million, and they think they have a shortage. So you can imagine how bad it is in India.
My gosh.
So it's absolutely critical proportions, the kind of mismatches we're talking about. So I think what we need in healthcare is really a solution which is no longer a manpower solution. We cannot train fast enough. We cannot staff fast enough. So technology is really the only answer. And you know, what we do in our organization, have been doing for the last 17 years that we've been around, is telemedicine. So we've basically focused on teleradiology. So we bring images from hospitals in different parts of the world and evaluate them from our group of about 80 radiologists who are also spread out across the world. So we've created a global platform that allows these studies to be reported in real time. And that's really only a temporizing measure. We've been doing that and we'll continue to do that, but it's not a long-term solution. The long-term solution involves assisting these same radiologists to be more efficient, more productive, and more accurate. And that's where AI plays a tremendous role. So the 3 things that AI can really do in healthcare that will be impactful are improve the functioning of the physician so that he or she can perform more effectively his or her duties. So for example, a radiologist. So when it's interesting, I always say radiology, especially emergency radiology to practice, is a bit like the restaurant. So we're sitting there, we're reporting scans, and suddenly the emergency room gets very busy, so we're flooded with cases. So the challenge is to keep the number of radiologists optimal to the number of cases that are coming in so that the cases can be reported in a timely manner and with the same level of accuracy. So it's like in a McDonald's, even if it's packed or whether it's empty, the level of quality of food has to be the same, right? Or in any restaurant. So ironically, it's the same in healthcare. You've got to be able to, I'm sure you've all seen the show ER or Chicago Hope or any of the hospital shows. When it's busy, you've got to be more efficient, and that's when things start to fall apart.
Right.
And, you know, the studies show that there is a certain optimal performance point beyond which the only way you can improve is if you have technology helping you. So that's where AI can help. In terms of, as radiologists, by picking up lesions, the radiologist does 3 things. He basically looks at an image and diagnoses, makes a finding. The second thing is he analyzes the finding. And the third thing is communicates that result to another clinician. So already we're starting to see AI doing the first part of that, which is making the finding, detecting the lesion, which is allowing us as radiologists to now focus on the higher value part of our role, which is actually analyzing and correlating that imaging information with the clinical information, which we've been trained to do in all those years of medical school, and then communicating it to a clinician in a form that allows for a treatment plan to be made. So in a sense, it's, as Jay said, it's allowing radiologists to escape the grunt day-to-day work that is irksome and monotonous and repetitive, and move to stuff which they actually enjoy doing.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. Arjun, the fact that you mentioned here it's not taking away jobs. In some ways, it's not even creating jobs because the jobs are being created for AI. I think that's a very interesting and a different kind of paradigm to look at. But it serves the human need, which sees a shortage in a particular space and allows perhaps the highest level of human interaction to come up in the interpretation of it, and truly therefore adding value life and quality of, health, etc., to people who benefit from it. So that's a completely different but very, very interesting perspective. So thank you for sharing, because that part of it, until we spoke, didn't really hit me as to what additionally and what we're doing with this. Because in my mind, traditionally, you have 100 radiologists, and then you have this being, this kind of facility replacing 50 of them. It's not true at all. The need is extremely different and very, very interesting. So thank you. I'm going to sort of look at our legal mind last, because he was the first person I came in and met. But here's, as far as legal is concerned, what you're doing is so interesting because it has so many layers. We're all very scared of lawyers. I know I am. My lawyer looked at my contract and said, "You expect to be paid after you have a contract like this?" After which I was in a blubbering mass of fear, saying, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" But apart from that, this is one of the spaces that's the highest expertise. It is considered to be extremely, highly knowledge-driven, interpretive, very strong in terms of understanding case laws, interrelations. There's a lot of high amount of intellect that goes into it. You've chosen the space, and yours is a startup. Tell us a little bit of what you're doing with this, and what is your vision of it being successful and impacting jobs?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned correctly, legal is a very kind of expert area where, you have to trust what the lawyer says and kind of go with it. And even though it's all in plain English, but you don't know if I remove a shall and put a must there, how that's going to change things. So that's true. And what we actually are trying to do is, make that easier, make that more accessible, to use Ajit's word, democratize law, and give people access to tools so that they can make legal decisions on their own. Now, I'm not saying that everyone is going to be making their own legal decisions, and we can look at a very similar parallel from when computers became kind of widespread in use in different areas. For instance, if you look at how Adobe has taken your darkroom process and digitized it using Photoshop, I mean, people would have argued back then that you wouldn't have photographers anymore, you wouldn't have experts in photography. But actually what it has done is it's given access to people to be able to develop their own photos. Now, I'm not going to say that you're going to go and develop your own wedding photos. You're still going to get a photographer for that. But now you're taking millions of photos every day, if not billions, because of these tools. Right now, everyone knows how to use Instagram and applies filters on it. Now that filter is actually a Lightroom process that 5, 10, 15 years back would have been done by a professional. You would have to pay thousands to just do that one photo, and now you do it in seconds. And you can see how that same kind of transformation has taken place in accounting, with books of accounts going from stacks of papers to being on Intuit and your QuickBooks, where you can get a P&L statement in seconds as opposed to have someone do grunt work with calculators and all. Same for AutoCAD and architectural designs, where you would have people, if you needed to make one change, you would need to make the whole drawing again.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do with law, where the last real technological shift that happened in law was the patch to Microsoft Word called track changes. Before that, it was faxes. Track changes came about, and now everyone sends emails, right? So it's sad, but it's true that since track changes, no matter what, how well the rest of technology has progressed, you haven't really seen much change in how legal works.
So you're disrupting track changes.
Sorry?
You're disrupting track changes.
We're giving people more tools than just track changes. But yeah, we're disrupting, you could say that.
But now we're using the word democratizing law. So he's just started something that I can't stop using. It's just, but really, that's what it is. This is going right down to the bottom of the pyramid. It's doing great work. I am absolutely fascinated by some of the things that I have learned in this conversation. And I'm quite sure that I think in terms of moving forward, we keep hearing about Google now trying to build in stereotypes, to sort of avoid stereotypes, teaching artificial intelligence about creativity, empathy, imagination. You have J.K. Rowling chapters being written by a computer. There are all sorts of things that are happening, but I think jobs seem to be quite secure. I want to move forward to questions from the audience. And I want to say thank you very much for, the kind of different insights that we've had from here. But yes, so one second. Now, I'm just terrible. I'm just going to go to the back of the room because I can't see you. So, gentleman over there. Yeah, the one who's looking back and wondering who I'm asking. Yeah, you. Yeah. So just tell me who you are. Yeah. Or you can just shout. We're good at being shouted at. Sorry. Just your name and then your question.
So my name is Nitin Ram, and so one of the things that you spoke about was who do you hold accountable, and the accuracy is only 99.9%. But if you have some machine or some AI which has 100% accuracy, you're really closing doors for new opportunities or to learn more, right? Because if you have one problem, I don't know if you know what are all the possible outcomes. So if you have a machine which has 100% accuracy, you won't really account for outcomes which you don't know that exist.
So what is your question?
So how do you accommodate both of this?
So how do you make machines fail? I'm kidding. Of course, he didn't mean that.
Question,
it
was probably for you.
Yeah, the question was more, okay, Namit, if you would like to take this, which is more on the lack, you cannot predict everything, and if you do, you're probably limiting yourself in terms of what you can do going forward. So, does that sort of summarize what you were saying, apart from the fact that I was telling you that you want machines to fail?
I don't want to be rude, but I would dispute the premise of the question. The premise is that what if we could build machines which are 100% accurate? And mathematics says that you cannot do that. I mean, any natural process has some noise, some variance that you cannot account for. So, okay, so 100% is out, but you say, okay, I try to get arbitrarily close to 100, right? 99.9999, whatever. So if I could you reiterate the question with this in mind? I mean, what is it that are you trying to pinpoint the liability? Or?
No, I think, would you like to say the question again? Because I think what he was trying to say was, you are reducing outcomes if everything is absolutely, perfectly predictable. Is that your question? See, it's such an esoteric question, we weren't able to understand.
No,
are you already in CMU or going there?
Going there.
That's it, you've got your PhD.
Well done.
Yeah. So can we just, whoever here from Carnegie Mellon, just give it to him right now? Yeah. Quickly, because now we have 3 other people who are just determined to outshout you on this. Yeah.
So you said you have to think about the failures that can happen, right? So
no, you can't plan for failures that you haven't seen. So when you develop an artificial intelligence model, you try to do the best with the data you have. You try to explicitly account for any biases in as much as you can see them. But there will be things that will always pass under the radar. So in some sense, the quest for making fair AI, I think, is unending.
Got it. Okay. So I think, hold on to that question for a bit. Now, I am going to do just the opposite, and I'm going to get this young lady in the front. So your name and your question, and I would really appreciate it if we could understand your question.
Okay, that's a lot of pressure.
You can understand, the collective intelligence here is very poor.
Okay.
Yeah, help us with that.
I'm Priyanka Raghavan, and I was quite impressed by this ethical AI. We've sort of been having a couple of conversations even outside on this. And are you, this is to the panel, so for skilling for the future, are you suggesting that a lot of us should start looking at liberal arts and programs like that? Because I think, like as an engineer, we do feel severely, there's a shortage in that on what we should collect and what not. So in a lot of our technology talks that we've been having through the morning, we've been talking about upskilling and we've been talking about new technologies. But I think this is interesting. Should we be looking at, say, liberal arts and sociology and things like that, which typically engineers never think of?
So my answer to that, I can give you my perspective. I'm not sure if it will work for everyone, but when you're dealing with human data, right, you should know what you're dealing with. It reflects all the sociological patterns that you see in human behavior. And yes, I think it would be absolutely essential for engineers to approach it with an interdisciplinary mindset. But that said, right, if you have the right curiosity to it, I don't think that you need to, go towards the degree. It's more on the side of, if you start with the mindset that I'm really going to understand where this data comes from, rather than treating it as a black box and, hoping to make sense of it through statistics. I think really trying to understand and account for the biases in the data that can lead you to the learning that you need to approach this problem. But yes, I would say not so much interdisciplinary education, but an interdisciplinary mindset. And however you get that mindset would be very useful to solving these AI problems. Because, for instance, LinkedIn is trying to understand what economic opportunity means, right? And this is not something that you can learn anywhere, but the data is telling you something. And how do we make sense of it? It means different things to different people. One person may want a job, and one person may want to transform their career. And you really want to fulfill their aspirations and not just what the data is telling you, because you want to surprise the user. So that's my view.
So there are two questions. One is about the ethics and the interdisciplinary. And
one thing I'd like to add.
Please jump in. Yes.
I mean, back to this idea of augmenting, right? So maybe, I think there's an underlying assumption when you're talking about AI that you have this super general, superhuman AI that's going to sit on a court and say, you're guilty, you're not guilty. We're very far away from it. And maybe the ultimate use case is for this ethical sort of way of the world will evolve is classic human in the loop. So you have AI that's, like for your case, saying the AI is telling me that 70% you're guilty, but at the end of the day, there's still a human who's consuming this data and making the final decision. So you're working almost hand in hand with the AI. So AI is a tool, not this scary looking, superhuman decision-making program. It might get there, but I think us as humans, we are smart enough to put in regulations that it will not become that.
Elon Musk doesn't think so.
Also, if I may say, these gradations of engineer, economists, sociologists is another 150 year syndrome. Didn't exist before that, right? We all know what Da Vinci did. He was aesthetic as well as an engineer and everything, right? So I mean, it's not, I'm just sort of making the point being that I think we've built some of these boxes and then we say, well, now it's important to be interdisciplinary. But the fact of the matter is that's how the world functions. All engineers should know that if they make product, they need to understand, sort of the human design part of it. Sociologists and economists know understanding data and analyzing data and its complexity requires a certain, scientific thinking and all that. So I'm just sort of, in some ways, I think it's a little bit, we have done this largely to sort of build, to supply to our 18th century, 19th century industrial revolution model of somebody does this, somebody does that, somebody does that. It's not the way the world works. So I mean, so it's a great question, but I think the answer is actually we go back to what was pretty natural to us for pretty much all our existence.
The interesting thing that you need to know with Ajit is that we talk years, he talks centuries. It's the third time he said 18th century. I'm getting really worried.
I'm also getting worried now. Actually.
So,
I'm really revealing my age in such a I was born in 19th, 20th century. I just want to be clear. I haven't sort of showed up from the 17th. Yeah.
You've received more than your questions answered.
Yeah. No, sorry. I'm going to ask you a question. If whoever wants to ask a question can stand up and then promise me with a hand on their heart that will be intelligible questions, I'll be very grateful. So gentlemen here, your name? Yeah, and would you just stand up because I'll be able to see you much easier and I can pick you by the, by the color of your badge or how wonderful you are. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, can you all hear me? Great, so this question concerns the commercialization opportunities of AI and what competitive advantage there may be for a startup that's based in India. And so this question, I think, setting some context, my observation is that I think India has a lot of talent. I think that India has data, that India has constraints, which may lead to inspiration, and I've seen that in the medical technology space. And then lastly, I think that from a regulatory perspective, this is a double-edged sword, right? But there's just generally less regulation, right, around data, and so that may give more opportunities to startups, say in the healthcare space, right, to say run clinical trials. So what I was curious is if the panel has any observations in their respective industries about what opportunities, considering some of those points that I had made, or maybe there's additional ones about the advantages of starting up from India, particular industries where you see there's opportunities. I mean, maybe Jay, from the ag space, right? There may be some big opportunities there. I think what you're doing is incredibly innovative. So, loaded question, long question, but please.
Opportunities in the startup space using artificial intelligence and keeping India as a base, I think is what you were talking about. And the panel perhaps having different perspectives. So who would like to run with that? Arjun, would you like to go with this? Opportunities from an Indian perspective and AI leading that.
So just from the healthcare perspective, I think you made a valid point that we have the slight advantage over, for example, the United States, in that we don't have an FDA sitting over us here. So in that sense, it allows us to innovate more rapidly. And we saw that in the, dare I say, in the 20th century when France was making rapid strides in things like neurointerventional radiology, simply because they weren't constrained by the regulations in the US. So most of the scientific advances in neurology happened in Europe, in France. So in that sense, it is actually a benefit or an advantage to have less regulation, and which gives you the opportunity to move faster. So in our particular space, we've seen there is, in healthcare, there's a huge opportunity in, for example, screening programs to develop AI around screening for things like pulmonary tuberculosis, for example, or breast cancer. Cancer is probably the best example of where screening is of value. So a lot of tools can be developed that will assist in, it's big data ultimately, the screening programs. There's masses of information coming through, and ultimately the constraint is the capacity of the physician interpreting that data. So AI there's a huge opportunity for AI there. At the other end of the spectrum is the fact that with the increasing complexity of medical information, this also spills over into an earlier part of the conversation about interdisciplinary. Within medicine, we have specializations, and each specialization is becoming so complex that the human brain is unable to deal with the pace of advances. So having artificial intelligence that allows you to absorb the latest advances, number one, and cross-specialization. So you can have a radiologist and a geneticist, and in fact there is a specialty that's evolving called radiogenomics, which bridges radiogenomics, which bridges these two specialties and allows diagnosis of greater specificity, which lends itself to personalized medicine and a whole bunch of other things. So that's where AI again has another big role. So it's at both ends of the healthcare spectrum, whether it's public health issues, mass issues, or very focused specific problems.
I'd just like to add one thing to what Adam asked, which is, so when you're talking about commercialization, I think the bitter truth is it's hard for startups to get paid in India. So that shouldn't stop us. The world is a very small place. You have access to as much compute power through AWS as someone in Silicon Valley. So the business model, I don't think, should focus entirely on India. Build in India, build your moat, which is your data moat, your training moat. Go outside and actually commercialize it. So just because you're an Indian headquartered startup doesn't mean you have to cater to only this, because your data acquisition, your labeling costs are super low, and anybody can get on a flight and go attack any other market.
And I think Niti Aayog is talking about the same thing, trying to be able to utilize what we have. I'd like Ajit's point of view before the next question on this, if you could, your perspective on this as well. And the next question, so while the next person is okay, so you hold it.
I'm just, I think we mentioned a lot of the areas, sort of, healthcare, I think certainly the obvious ones are in areas where there is a big creativity or a, a judgmental angle to it. So those are the kind of areas, and I think they cut across pretty much all fields if you think about it. I think there is, and I think it's really going to be interesting to figure out two things. One is, where does the capability exist? And I think I agree with Jay, you don't need to be geographically constrained on capability. But the other question really is on uptake. And that's where I think your comment on regulations come in. And there, I think countries like India in healthcare, which have a huge, big gap, you're going to see probably the biggest move here, just in terms of where you're seeing it, as opposed to, let's say, in the case of media, where there may be a tremendous opportunity, but there could be other models that play out. So I think it's, you have to, I mean, I see sort of that as, so I see sort of those as one. And the other one is, I mean, one is sort of starting to hear about this more, anything which is a dangerous job.
Yeah.
Sort of what is classified as dangerous jobs. I think you're seeing a lot more organizations starting to prefer using models just because, less people getting hurt and injured. And so it's more from a safety perspective. So I think those are the two main.
Yeah. And I'm a big dog lover, so I don't want the dogs going into the minefield. I'm happy with the robots doing that. Yeah.
Fair point.
Robots can pay taxes and go to the minefield. I'm cool
Correct.
with that.
No, I mean, actually, defense is another big one. I didn't want to, it's an obvious one, actually. And India is looking at AI in a big way for defense.
Thanks, Ajay. And thank you for a very good question.
Okay, my name is Vivek. I'm an incoming student to CMU. I have a question related to the policy front for introduction of AI into our society. Now, as you know, that AI just cannot be introduced without the backing of the policymakers, and they are obviously going to create a lot of hindrances, primarily because AI entities are not a voting entity, and the job losses that they create today, as you had mentioned, that 1.5 million job losses will be translated into 2.3 million creation of jobs. But as Naman mentioned, there'll be high-skilled jobs. They won't be the low-skilled jobs of truckers or service people in the McDonald's or other things like that. So the question here is about who is actually responsible for the reskilling, right?
Good question. Good question.
Is it the government's onus? Is it the industry's onus? Because it is because of the industry's introduction that this reskilling is necessary. And the politicians are certainly not going to lose their voter base for today to get something that maybe gives a profit 15 years later when they are no longer required.
So your question then can be broken up into two. One is, what is the policy impact? And the second is, while this is being created, being not a voting constituency and therefore not being attractive to the politician, is what is our thoughts on reskilling in order to offset that? So Ajit is actually just dying to answer that, and I can understand why, because he really, he has done incredible work in Bridgespan and Acumen and before in terms of creating capacity. So I think, I know all of us have done different aspects of it, but go for it. Don't look surprised. I know you do all these exciting things. So go for it, Ajit.
No, so let me, I think the great situation in this is that, really, it's all of us are kind of just figuring this one out, right? Really, and I think to suggest that everyone has this perfect answer, there isn't. So let me sort of answer with that liberal caveat to ensure that whatever I say can be, foolish. I want to sort of say two things. One is that as far as I have a bit of a problem with this AI phrase being used as a catch-all for everything. And that's how it sort of gets used, right? I mean, if you think about mobile telephones, I'm just being very prosaic. Today you use mobile phones in every part of it. You had a policy for, on telecom and how it gets used, or data, but it's utilized in every industry in a very different way. So I don't see this, you will perhaps have this one overarching policy, but you will see it being, having a different level of policy interventions in each of its applications. It'll have its regulatory challenges, it'll have, at each level. So I don't think there's one answer. I think you have to almost see this as kind of the next, it's like saying computers. You can't, there's no one answer for computers, right? It's different. So that's the first point. As far as the second point you made, which is around upskilling or reskilling, I think this is the most important question, and I'm glad that you brought it up, and I'm sure that, I'm really appreciated, because it is, I think there are three responsibilities here. While I think we're all being very upbeat and saying there will be jobs, I think let's accept that in these transitions there will be shocks as well, right? And the question you're asking is, how does as a society, how do we deal with those shocks? And I think the way, you typically you would look at it is that, number one, you definitely do need to, I would say that government needs to be cognizant of it. I'm not sure if they're the best agency to be able to create skilling programs for that, and we come to a different issue, but I think governments do have a role. And the second part that I would say is this has to be something started at K to 12. You cannot show up in the 10th grade or the 12th grade and start skilling people for something. So we talked about, a multidisciplinary, all of these kind of the ways in which a person starts thinking and getting ready for the world of tomorrow has to start K to 12. And the last one is the corporates, the industries, the startups of today, which are going to be the big giants of tomorrow, have to basically take that ownership as well, because their talent pool is the same. It hasn't suddenly dramatically changed. You can't suddenly say, I'm only going to recruit people at the age of 18. It's not going to work that way. You need people at all levels. So it is a common journey. Hopefully it will be done in concert rather than each one going off and doing its own thing, which is what's actually happening right now. So hopefully there'll be some, I tried to answer your question, that's the best I could.
No, I think it's a good one, and policy, reskilling, these are two important parts of it. We have time for just one more question.
I would just like to
please
make
jump in
two
and
qualifications of the same question itself.
Okay, I have room for one, I don't know, you'll have to tell me one question? One question, I'm so sorry. But can we take the other one, which is offline after, maybe at tea, if you don't mind? So one more, go ahead. Jump in, and then that question from the gentleman.
Just 2 points. So one of the points that he made was about how many jobs will be lost. I think here we should be very careful when we read these kind of reports. Nearly nowhere are there reports that say that the jobs will be completely lost. Everybody talks about certain tasks being automated. So some aspect of your job will be automated, but your job will not be lost. So 1.2, 1.3, 2.3, whatever we talk about, these are not jobs will suddenly go away. Right? So this is something that we should always be
There are realities to it, Namit, which, for example, what Jayasima said, the guy who's sitting and pulling out weeds is now going to be replaced.
Obviously, but these are not those scary figures that we
probably as okay. So the doomsday, the whole that thing. Okay, that's a fair point. So I'm so sorry, the gentleman who wanted to ask a question, and your name and your
I'm
question.
I'm Vijay Pandey. I'm not getting to CMU. My son is getting to CMU, so I happen to be here. But thanks a lot for giving this opportunity. Now, there's one interesting thing. This AI debate is going to be really big. I mean, many panels are going to come up and all that. And something great came out of this panel, because 1985 is when I started doing some coding, and still I do it. So what I have seen is, it was said that AI is actually an automation. It's not artificial intelligence. It's never going to replace the human beings. That's really true. And then robots paying taxes, that will come very soon.
Yeah, but
that will come very soon.
If you could stand up, because you're not very clear.
The actual, I'm just coming. So the actual thing is a job not getting lost. That is also happening, because if in 2009, when the cloud computing came, it brought a lot of automation and killed so many IT jobs. We are already seeing this, the demand is going down and all that. So the thing which I want to know is that when the question of reskilling comes, so when the jobs are being replaced by robots, then they will end up paying taxes, and those taxes could be used in reskilling the people. Is that going to be a solution?
So is that your question?
Yes.
So the question is, do we want to pay taxes? Do we want the robots to pay taxes or not?
Yes.
Okay, you have an answer to that?
I'm going to just slightly divert and maybe end on a hypothetical crystal ball sort of approach. Yes, I think, look, if robots get significantly better than what humans are doing in specific tasks, there will be a revolution where this weed laborer will stand next to my robot and take a rock and smack it, right? But the only way to solve this issue is you say, okay, if you let this robot go, the farmer saves 300 rupees and 20 rupees gets deposited in your bank account. So there is a solution for it. It's just a redistribution of wealth. The one crystal ball thing that we discussed in our offline thing is, and this, you guys can get excited or depressed about this, maybe the ultimate future is humans do no work. So all of us get up in the morning, you have a robot deliver your food, you have a robot that makes your own, specialty of the day, someone's cleaning, and you just enjoy life. And you have no work. And that could be another future, maybe not now, 50 years from now.
No, we have Swiggy and Dunzo.
Yeah, it's
We're
getting
almost there.
Yeah,
it's-
who needs robots?
Yeah, and it's getting there. And so then you get into this other fascinating discussion that, okay, imagine a scenario where AI gets so optimized that humans just, I mean, quote unquote, enjoy life. Then what happens? Then how do you get compensated? Do you get some money from the government just to, go along with life? It's crystal ball stuff, but it's interesting.
Yeah. No, I think it's an interesting question from the point of view of what really happens. And I think we could talk about this for a while because, the idea of mechanization, artificial intelligence is the ultimate part of it, is to be able to create more space and more time for creating value. But at what point does the value creation get inward or outward? And that's a whole different discussion. And I'm looking forward to being here next year with CMU and probably doing that one. So I'm going to close with this, and is it really, okay, there's one question, may I? Yeah, because, yeah. But
if
1
I-
minute to finish that question.
Yeah,
1
sure.
minute.
If I may just add one more point.
Janani is against my thought of view, so I'm waiting for, we always spar. Go ahead.
Yes, I mean, we toned it down a little bit,
Yes.
but so but at a very high level, from a philosophical point of view, there will always be a future of jobs. With or without AI, jobs will have a future. There's always some jobs that go away, some jobs that come in, and we're constantly upskilling ourselves. So that needs to happen, whether our killer robots come into play or not. So.
I would love to end with that statement, actually. I would love to end with that statement, but if you have that one question,
So my question is directed towards what Dr.
1 minute,
Namit was
1 minute.
speaking
I'm
about. Like AI can inherently inherit our biases. So say I have an AI that sees if a person defaults on a loan, it might reinforce the bias that a certain underprivileged section of people are more likely to default.
Okay.
So we need to replace.
I'm going to stop you. That's a very good question, but it's been already talked about when we said biases and stereotypes. But Janani, if you can answer that, yeah.
You brought up with the pitfall, but how do you react to it with a fair AI? What is a fair AI?
Yeah, good.
That's a great question. There is no gold standard for a fair AI, just like there's no gold standard for a fair human being. So what we can do though is strive in that direction and work towards getting there rather than making it a hindsight problem was my larger point. But yeah, in the interest of time, we can take this offline.
No, it's a possibility we can create monsters, but I think at this point we are also looking at creating the robustness, creating the structure, the framework, to have something which is something we can own going forward as far as artificial intelligence and jobs are concerned. So I will end, and I leave it to Rashmi to sort of close. We're definitely beyond time. To be able to say what Janani said, which is the future of jobs, essentially, I would say, would change in context, would change in dynamics, would change in fine-tuning. But it will always be something that we need to do to be productive economically and to make a difference. So I would be very interested to see what the next few years hold for us. But I can tell you one thing. It is definitely going to be exciting. So, Rashmi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Priya. That was a really interesting session. So a round of applause to our panelists. And I would like to just remind all of us, Ajit's point about AI is going to be a net positive for our economy as well as humanity. So let's end on that note. We'll start.